Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be moderating a panel today on such an important topic, maritime security. The guests we have today are eminently qualified to talk about this topic. And they are Taha Ozan, Research Director at the Anchor Institute and former Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the Turkish Parliament. General Claudio Graziano, former Chief of Staff of the Italian Armed Forces, former Chairman of the European Union Military Commission, and Chairman of Fincantieri. Michael Tancham, non-resident fellow in economics and the energy program at the Middle East Institute. Vice Admiral Aurelio De Carolis, Commander-in-Chief of the Italian Fleet, and Nimrod Goran of the Council for Military Diplomacy, or diplomats. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's sometimes lost to us how much our lives here on land in Europe depend on what happens at sea. Most of goods that come from Asia, for instance, or most of our oil, most of our gas, and most of our internet travels through the sea. It sometimes takes a dramatic event to remind us of how central maritime routes are to our lives. For example, last year when the Suez Canal was blocked, it is estimated that $9.6 billion worth of goods were held up each day. Of course, geopolitical tensions can play out at sea. For instance, we've seen tensions between Iran and the US in the Strait of Hormuz. But they can also, the maritime space can also provide a common interest in countries that otherwise do not get along, such as Lebanon and Israel in the recent US brokered maritime agreement. Until recently, one aspect of maritime security that didn't get very much attention was what happened underwater, the infrastructure that travels on the sea floor. So gas lines, gas pipelines, and cables. That, of course, all changed when the Nord Stream pipelines were attacked in September. All of a sudden, European governments woke up to the realization that these assets were both incredibly important and incredibly vulnerable. And now we have navies from the North Sea to the Mediterranean patrolling underwater pipelines and cables. This, of course, is all happening at a time of great tension in Europe with the war in Ukraine, which brings me to the first question for General Graziano. Could you please talk a little bit about the implications that the war in Ukraine is having on maritime security in the Mediterranean?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight in such a distinguished group of panelists, and thanks to the public and to who work hard to organize this important conference. Ukraine does have a direct impact on the not only on the Mediterranean Sea. As somebody said, normally all the crises grew up in land or even in the mountains, but after that they moved to the sea. They moved to the sea line of communication. They moved to the sea area of crisis. Now, the direct implication is, of course, the Black Sea and the West Ending crisis and the direct threats of the Russian and the Black Sea. But the Black Sea is connected to the Mediterranean through the Strait of Dardanelli, and actually is part of what we call a large Mediterranean, and now it's even more larger than the Mediterranean. And if you consider that the line of crisis that is moving by the Black Sea across the Aegean and the East Med, that is already an area maybe not of crisis, but of endurance tension for energy and for sea line delimitation. And after that, move inside the Mediterranean, cross all the other line of crisis coming from the central Mediterranean, from the Balkans. You can imagine that the war in Ukraine has even reaffirmed stronger the centrality of Mediterranean, the fact that the Mediterranean is the place where many possibilities, many lines of cooperation are crossing, but also a lot of lines of crisis. And that is particularly true, clearly also for energy, for the pipelines, for the movement of goods. Mediterranean, in addition, since all the area of the sea area of crisis are more or less connected, Black Sea, Mediterranean, the Strait of the Hormuz, the area of the Horn of Africa, and even in a way, if you look around the Malacca Strait, all the nations see that the threats are moving around the Mediterranean, moving around the sea. Even not considering the presence of Russian submarine, that is a threat by itself. And even if our conventional submarines, there are missile launchers, there are other threats, as I said, for the energy, as you said, for many, we can say sea-based, is the sea-based domain, both for communication, both for gas, the new arena of threats in which we have to work, the underwater system, the protection underwater. So all of these raise the need to a different approach in the Mediterranean Sea for cooperation, but also to face new threats that are coming and are not finishing very soon, because the war is not going to finish, and maybe it's going to spread. We have to not to forget another thing, that the Ukraine crisis was not the one that generated the energetic crisis. It was the one that happened because we had already an energetic crisis, and Putin was taking advantage of this. And maybe the crisis in Ukraine sometimes is diverting us from other crises that still are coming from the south, that are still coming from failed state, terrorism, migration in terms of an asymmetric use of migrants as an additional threat. Maybe that is spread again by Russia within that. So at this point, Mediterranean remains a central point, particularly for Europe and the other neighbors in Med, the MENA country, etc. Also because most probably the United States are looking much more now at the Pacific theater.
Thank you so much. Admiral De Carolis, could you maybe talk a little bit about the Italian point of view? What is Italy doing about these threats that the General just outlined?
For sure, good evening. Let me also join General Graziano in thanking you for the invitation for this extraordinary event. And let me start by saying that I subscribe and I confirm everything that has been said by General Graziano. It happens, he was our Chief of Defense some years ago, and I had the honor to serve under him as the Chief Communication Officer for a while. That was a great experience. I may build on what has just been said by General Graziano. First of all, the point he highlighted of the overall connections of all the water spaces in the world. So what happens in the Mediterranean has direct impacts on the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, well into the Indian Ocean, on the eastern side, and similarly to the west with the Gulf of Guinea. Maritime trade is 90%. We're almost more or less 90% of the world trade, and that is crucial to the world's economy. So when we talk about the importance of the seas, it is something that has been taken in the international community today. The point is that recently we are focusing on, let's say, new issues with respect to maritime security. And one has been mentioned by General Graziano, the protection of the infrastructures at sea. He talked about also submarines. That entails the presence of, let's say, non-allied fleets at sea. So the question may be, what do you do? As the fleet commander, Italian Navy, I may say we have always been focused on this. Just to talk about a navy, the Russian Navy has historically been present in the Mediterranean. There are some differences now. There has been a significant increase in the number of Russian ships and submarines in the Med. So what does this entail to us? For sure, it's an increase of the operational tempo of the Italian fleet. And how we do it both at national level with national operations, such as Mediterraneo Sicuro, which has evolved. It was started back in 2015, and last August evolved into a wider operations involving almost the whole of the Mediterranean Sea. What do we do there? Well, we make sure that trades may safely flow through the area, and we counter illicit activities. This has always been ongoing, but the additional aspect is that we are doing it with a significant higher number of submarines and of potential threats of Russian ships, while at the same time, as has been mentioned by General Graziano, we have in this particular moment an increase in the presence of, say, NATO warships. So NATO is very active, has always been active in the Med. The US Navy is particularly active. I was on the US carrier, the USS Bush, 3 days ago, anchored off Naples. And as the Italian Navy, we are providing escort to the carrier group with 2 ships at the moment. So it's a big effort, because if you have to provide 1 ship at any point in time to a carrier group, it means you have to have at least between 3 and 4 ships throughout the year that get committed.
There's always an aircraft carrier, right?
Exactly.
Always, yeah.
But also, based on the big effort that NATO and the US also are doing in order to to generate deterrence in the Med based on the ongoing scenario, an initiative has been started to carry out what are called as multi-carrier operations. We have done already 4. The last one was in the month of November, between the 20th and the 24th. And we participated with our carrier, the ITS Cavour, and France had Charles de Gaulle at sea, and the USS Bush. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic Ocean, so back to what has been said in terms of connection between different maritime areas, in the Atlantic, we had the HMS Queen Elizabeth, one of the 2 British carriers, at sea, together with the USS Ford. So what do we take out of that? Is a big effort that provides very clear signals in terms of strategic communications to the potential opponents. One thing I would like to add is in terms of our effort to protect the undersea infrastructure. We work on a daily basis. I'm glad my wife is here, because he may confirm that in the last few months, I'm in this job since a year now, and she has not seen me very often, because most of the time I'm buried in our HQ, which is not in the center of Rome. It's, say, 16 kilometers to the outskirts, northwest of Rome. And from there, we are, let's say, controlling on a daily basis, let's say, the 3 main gas pipelines we have with Libya, with Algeria, through Tunisia, and through the Adriatic. How do we do it? With an increased effort of mine hunters, hydrographic ships, and surveillance carried out with maritime patrol aircraft, helicopters. And we try to arrange all the forces we have in order to do this, meanwhile cooperate with the other navies. There is a huge cooperation ongoing between the alliance, the Northern Alliance, the NATO, the European Union. We have an operation that General Graziano has been coordinating in his previous job as chairman of the European Union Military Committee, which is IRINI, that stems out of the Operation Sophia. So big effort in the Mediterranean at national level, at multinational level, and I do believe that cooperation is one of the key words to bring safety and security to the maritime space.
I've had the pleasure to see firsthand the gargantuan effort that's going on to protect some of this infrastructure at sea. It's very impressive, but a lot, quite daunting, I think, the work that needs to be done. Michael, moving on to you, could you please talk a little bit about how you see geopolitical tensions playing out in the Mediterranean basin and interfering with activity at sea?
Sure. Right. What we have to do is connect the maritime security map with the maritime geoeconomic map. And you mentioned the Ever Given. See, we don't need the Russia-Ukraine war. A year before the Russia-Ukraine war, March 2021, the Ever Given was stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, to give you a sense of how important Mediterranean trade is, in the time of our panel, 1 hour, $400 million will cross the Suez Canal to Europe. $400 million worth of goods, just in the hour we're sitting here. It is enormous. And now we have the unwinding of globalization, and Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East are becoming more interconnected and interdependent. The goods are not going to come from Asia. They're going to come from Morocco. They're going to come from Egypt. The metals, not just the oil, the metals are going to come from Saudi Arabia. So Europe cannot survive without North Africa and the Middle East, and vice versa. The lifeblood is maritime commerce in the Mediterranean. Just like a person needs the circulation of blood to live, if the circulation of maritime commerce stops, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa cease. I'm not exaggerating. 1/3 of all European trade goes through the Mediterranean, and it's increasing. The northern European range of ports, which are the most efficient, have seen an 8% drop in their market share, while Mediterranean ports collectively 7% increase. So we need to ensure this. And I want everybody here who's from the Eastern Mediterranean knows the date 4 August 2020. So now we're 2 years before the Russia-Ukraine war. If you don't know that date, the Beirut bomb blast, right? Because what's key here are ports. It's the connections between ports, as you've mentioned, and I'll talk about that maybe in the next round, but ports. And I want to explain something here, because you ask a question which is really, what is the risk? Anybody who does security knows risk has two components: threat and vulnerability. If you need a basic equation, risk equals threat and vulnerability. So not only do we have to think about the threats, but what are our vulnerabilities? That Beirut blast, the iconic ruins that you see, you know what you're looking at? That's Lebanon's grain storage. It had 3 months worth of grain storage in Beirut. That's where the blast happened, and that was gone. There is no grain storage. There are 12 flour mills in Tripoli that have warehouses. So Lebanon only has 1 month's worth of storage at most. But that was okay, because they got grain from Ukraine, which was only a week's travel from the Black Sea ports to Tripoli. Then that's the vulnerability, only 1 month's storage. Then when you don't have grain coming from Ukraine, and you have only 1 month to scramble, at best it takes 25 days to get grain from the east coast of the United States to Lebanon, you're in a time clock, you run out of time. So we have to look at threats, but the other side is what these gentlemen do, they prevent also our vulnerabilities. And we shouldn't be surprised. Go back, we talk Mediterranean, Middle East. Go back to Fujairah in May 2019, where 4 ships, 3 tankers and 1 bunkering ship, were attacked off the coast of the United Arab Emirates with the limpet mines, you know, these magnetic mines that stick to the hulls. And then Abqaiq, right, in September 2019, where Abqaiq is the oil treatment facility, treats 75% of Saudi Arabia's oil. It was hit, went offline. It was the largest single reduction of oil in global history. $5.7 billion, like that. So we've had a lot of warning, right? It shouldn't come as a surprise. It's like COVID. We didn't look at it ahead of time. We've had years, and what's happening in the Red Sea, like all the sabotage in the Red Sea, it can come to the Mediterranean. And we are now more vulnerable because we are now more interconnected. And the fact that we're more interconnected means we need more cooperation between the northern shore of the Mediterranean and the southern shore of the Mediterranean. We need to connect the eastern Mediterranean with the western Mediterranean. And there's a role for NATO in consultation to do that, because many NATO allies hold drills with non-NATO members. We can talk about that. And then also the European Union and UNIFOR. And then I think we need to see regional groupings of northern Mediterranean and southern Mediterranean. That makes sense. But I'll pause there, and I will pick it up in my next.
Thank you. You mentioned Lebanon. You know, one interesting thing about the sea is that there are, you know, competition over resources can stoke tensions and you know, deepen conflict between countries, but they can also offer an opportunity to bridge some of those divisions. Nimrod, could you talk a little bit about how that has played out between Israel and Lebanon?
Sure. The Israeli-Lebanon deal that was reached a couple of months ago on Maritime border was a really important and significant development. It happened after more than a decade of failed negotiations by these two countries, and after decades in which the countries did not manage not only not to reach agreement, but also did not engage with each other, even if these negotiations were not done directly, but through American mediation. So this agreement really was unprecedented in nature. It was made possible because of a committed and effective American mediator with an administration backing it. It was because of political will in both countries, including actors within the countries who used to be veto players. There was a sense of urgency because of political timelines, both in Israel and in Lebanon, and there was a real need. The economic situation in Lebanon, which was deteriorating, and the fear in Israel of security escalation with Hezbollah if no deal is reached. Throughout the negotiations, messaging coming from Washington and Brussels were emphasizing the regional security or stability element of such a deal. It was not dealing with bilateral relations between Israel and Lebanon. It was about implications for the broader region. And the positive implications were evident because of things that happened within each country at a bilateral level and at the regional level. Because within each country, stability means better economic situation in Lebanon, and stability means less fear in Israel of a significant confrontation with Hezbollah. On the bilateral level, I mentioned already, it's not a normalization agreement, it's not recognition, it's nothing, but it does create a much better environment in which the countries could interact indirectly with each other in regional international forums, and we saw what happened, for example, at COP in Sharm, where there was this regional meeting on climate and environment, including ministers from Israel and Lebanon themselves. And you see in Israel the change of perception towards Lebanon as a country, not only as a space for war. So things are changing and shifting, and it does create a precedent that can lead to other countries which are enemy states within the Mediterranean that are not recognizing, not engaging, not signing peace agreements, but manage to identify spaces for ad hoc win-win agreements that produce tangible benefits for both sides. And it will also lead to concrete steps of other countries needing to negotiate the maritime borders as a consequence of the Israel-Lebanon deal. Maybe it's Lebanon and Cyprus, maybe it's Lebanon and Syria, maybe other issues as well. So look Cyprus, look Gaza Marine field as a possible consequence, and generally speaking, more cooperation, more dialogue, even if indirectly in the Mediterranean, is a very good thing for both countries involved and the region as a whole.
Thank you. Taha, we mentioned the war in Ukraine. Obviously, Turkey has, it feels much closer to Turkey than it does in the Mediterranean, for example. Can you talk a little bit about how the Ukraine conflict has played out in Turkey with particular reference to what's happening in the Black Sea and the East Mediterranean?
I mean, the most difficult question, by the way, but I will come to that. But first, I think to understand the Eastern Mediterranean conflict and to develop a geopolitical perspective, one first should look at the geography. And geography helps a lot in this conflict, because Eastern Mediterranean was always a center of trade ground, geopolitical developments, and hotspot for international issues. And when you have a geography in hand, and this is what Eastern Mediterranean will tell you. In the outer Mediterranean, you have Libya and Greece. And if you check out lengths of coastal lines in Eastern Mediterranean, Wikipedia really helps here. From shortest to longest, you have Syria and Greece makes around 8%, which is 4 each. Lebanon 5%, Israel 6%, around 270 plus kilometers. Greek Cyprus 8%, Turkish Cyprus 9%, Egypt 24%, 1,000 kilometers, and Turkey 40%, 1,800 kilometers. These are Wikipedia information, but it really helps to understand each country when they look Eastern Mediterranean. Their geographical imagination is shaping their perspective, forming their geopolitics, and mostly designing their security approach. And they are stuck in that. And when Greece is projecting about Eastern Mediterranean, economically, security-wise, etc., they are more or less thinking about that 12% with Greek Cyprus, or Turkey thinking with 40% plus 9% Turkish Cyprus, which is around 50%. This is good, bad, we need to talk. But this is, in this geographical setting, entire energy infrastructure, trade, maritime borders, security, exclusive economic zones, delimitation taking place. So this is the setting. And at the heart of the current conflict, we are experiencing trouble of divergence of this geographical reading from geopolitical reading. And anyone who looks at Mediterranean would easily say, as Admiral and the General said, the cooperation is over there, if you want to reach out easily. Because it's not like other conflicts, it has a price for everybody. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Not only possible, but also urgently needed. Because there is a new threat and a pressuring point. Russian unprovoked invasion attempt of Ukraine is forcing for this. And right now, an interesting thing happening. Three seas, Black Sea, Aegean Sea, and Mediterranean, not only geographically interconnected, but right now geopolitically they became interconnected. So developments have potential to reflect in Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. And for the Eastern Mediterranean, an actor either will turn the issue into prisoner's dilemma or will find a way to cooperate. And the pressure coming out of Black Sea, and you know, Mediterranean also called White Sea. So the black and white right now met in a conflict zone. It will continue to create its ripple effect in a harsher way. We are in the early stages of Ukraine invasion attempt. An entire perspective towards Black Sea security is transforming itself. And it is affecting Aegean Sea. As you see, the Turkish and the Greek conflict is over there, actually popped up again. And it will also show its ripple effect on Eastern Mediterranean. This may sound bad, but it is also pushing all actors to cooperate more. As I said, they will either turn this into prisoner's dilemma, which I think not possible, or they will find out of this pressure a cooperating ground and cooperate. And Turkey is adapting for that. Last 1 year, or let's say 10 months, Turkish re-establishing relations from Israel to Egypt to etc. is actually a maneuvering attempt, an adaptation attempt to new realities. And I am hopeful on that, that new reality will push all other countries and somehow geography and the geopolitics meet and there will be a middle ground.
Thank you. You mentioned the need for greater cooperation. I have a question for General Graziano. Do you think there's enough cooperation happening at an EU level when it comes to maritime security? Or do you think more can and should be done to enhance that?
No, cooperation is never enough, of course, let's say. Actually, European Union has made a lot of step forward in the last decade in terms of development of security, defense, in terms of attention at sea, with the new strategy that started in 2014 for maritime control and trying to enhance the cooperation. Of course, the final aim that the European Union is the only supranational organization that does have all the power in its hand, that is the political, the economic, the informative, and also the military power. And if we would be able to act properly as a nation, that is very difficult. But at least with a single voice, it would be easier also to solve the problem. Not all the problem, because actually we can contribute and cooperate in this section. But of course, we have to push for the cooperation. We had a big increase for the cooperation the 24th of February, when the war in Ukraine started. And Europe, that affects also the maritime dimension. And Europe was able to do in 4 hours what was not able to do in 10 years. So in 4 hours, the 27, it was decided by the 27 to support Ukraine also with lethal weapons. Before the word weapons, lethal weapons in the European Union was even forbidden. After that, of course, with the prolonging of the war, now there are little bit that is very negative, the war. So, but there are, for the European cooperation, positive and negative effort. The negative effect is the urgency of some requirement by the eastern country facing Russia are diverting the attention maybe to other market. That is normal, maybe to USA. Some positive because there is a clear understanding and there is no way back that now we have to find at the economical, industrial, and military level a better way to cooperate in order to achieve what we want that is called strategic autonomy. So the two words that we learned from this war was the fact that the world war still exists, and still are affecting our affairs, that the peace is what we have to preserve to develop better the society, but everything has to reach in what we call autonomy. So Europe needs to reach the autonomy, what we call strategic autonomy. That doesn't mean to do everything alone, but it's the ability to do something when it's required, to act alone when it's required. That is at economical, military, energetic level. After that, we will always try to operate with others, first with NATO. But there are situations in which we need to reach this strategic autonomy. And that can happen at sea, in the cooperation at sea. Launching operation, there are sometimes it's easier for European Union to launch an operation than for NATO. Now, the ambition is to have a better cooperation between NATO and European Union. But IRINI, for example, it's a European Union mission, and act under Chapter 7 of United Nations. And there is much more power, the Sea Guardian, that is a NATO operation, much bigger in terms of ships, that is a sea control operation, but does not have any mandate by Chapter 7 of United Nations. So in case of Chapter 5, okay, can reinforce, it can launch operation, but cannot act. And this one is very important. The other important thing for European Union in the Mediterranean Sea is the ability to, let's say, embrace the southern shore Mediterranean countries, the different countries that are actually sometimes the origin of some crisis from illegal migration or from terrorism, to help this country to establish a more, let's say, stable situation, to help the development of security, and that needs a different approach, and it's what, of course, also the strategic compass call upon. We have to remember that we still have a lot of crises in the southern shore Mediterranean. Just mention Libya, that is still a divided country, a rich country, fully divided, where the flow of migrants, asymmetric flow of migrants are coming, the ongoing war in Syria, everything is going to sum up to the situation in Ukraine. We have to work with other countries, Tunisia, Algeria. We have an example that is 5 plus 5, that already put together 5 Southern European countries, France, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and Malta, and 5 countries from the MENA, that is Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia. And this is an example of cooperation that we have to increase. Europe can help in that. We have to remember, and I want to remember, an operation that was launched by European Union in 2016 after a big disaster in the Mediterranean Sea, when a boat rolled out and with close 1,000 dead. It was launched an operation that was called Sophia. Now, Sophia, after that, for many reasons, was suspended, but Sophia is an example of what we should restart in a different way, maybe, because within the mandate of Sophia, we had the third phase in which was supposed that European Union, with the approval of the Libyan, could have worked along the coast, ashore, in training the Coast Guard, in working with the Libyan.
Thank you.
And that was very important because it was approved by Libya, and it was a great possibility. Now, IRINI is an arm embargo operation, still working, and we have to maintain and to keep this one because still it's a deterrence, but everything requires a better cooperation, better coordination. I repeat, there is no way back after Ukraine, but that requires a big effort by all the countries to overtake and some egoism.
Thank you. Well, following up on what you said, Admiral De Carolis, could you talk a little bit about what the Italian Navy is doing and what ways it's working with its allies, whether it's NATO or non-NATO countries, to achieve some of the goals that General Graziano mentioned?
Well, in numbers, in very few words, our daily commitment as the Italian Navy is 3,000 sailors. And when I say sailors, I include also elements of our amphibious force deployed in the different areas where the Italian military is involved. Let's say at a almost global level. 18 ships, 2 submarines, 14 aircraft committed on a daily basis. This is what we do. We carry out, at the moment, a very important operation. That is a deterrence operation. So what the strategic, the strategy of the alliance now revolves around the defense and deterrence of the area of responsibility. And the way we do it is through an operation in the southern portion of NATO, which is a Noble Shield, run by the Joint Force Command in Naples, and that coordinates all the assets in the region. As I said before, multi-carrier operations are a very relevant example that fuels our NATO's strategic communications. This is not only that, as the General said, interactions. What I want to highlight is the capability of maritime forces to synergize their activity. If I have a ship under a national commitment, national operational control in the center of the Mediterranean, and something occurs and the NATO requires one of our assets to do something, well, there can be a transfer of authority of that ship. So this is flexible command and control, is what we do on a daily basis. I'm in constant touch. When I say constant touch, I mean I can pick up the phone, or they phone me on a regular basis with the commander in Markham, the Maritime component commander in Markham, Keith Blount, Admiral Blount, and with my counterpart in the US Navy, who is Admiral Ishii, the commander of the 6th Fleet, and he reports to Admiral Munch, who is the Joint Force Commander, who relieved Admiral Burke some months ago. So very, very close cooperation, units operating under the EU flag. We may also reshuffle them and transfer to operational control of another HQ. This is something peculiar to maritime forces, and brings me to highlight something that I think gets back to the current position of General Graziano, which is the return on investment that you have when you invest in security. Well, I can talk about the Navy. That's the business that I am in. But I may easily say that that applies to the military in general, to the Air Force and to the Army, because if, as Professor Tantrum said, maritime trade is so important from a geo-economic point of view, and I took a half page of notes of what you have just said, well, then it means that there is a huge business there that is part of the stability of the whole world. So if we put €1 in terms of investment in building, say, new combatants, new submarines, or in general, new capabilities for the military, well, then it's probably a well-invested amount of money, in particular, at this point in time. There is another topic that I came out in the previous discussion. Well, one was on cooperation, and if I may say, I was exactly thinking at the Flies Plus 5. Cooperation was highlighted by Professor Odds and also by you as a key element to bring stability to the region and also at global level. And the 5+5 is if I may say, I was thinking the same sort of cooperation, because it's a sub-regional cooperation initiative. So what we need is to work at global, regional, sub-regional level. And the Adrian is another initiative that refers to the Adriatic. And then we have all the bilateral activities. Just to give an example, today, we have an Italian ship carrying out a bilateral training exercise with the Moroccan Navy. And we do the same with Libya, with Algeria, with Tunisia, also within the 5+5, so bilateral, multilateral. Another element that I wanted to highlight is what do all these corporations bring? I mean, where is the value added? One of them is in the capability to achieve the maritime situational awareness. That means to know what is at sea, what they are doing, why they are there. So just to give you an example, we are following a ship. Actually, it's painted in white. She's supposed to be a oceanographic research ship. She pulled into the Med. We are following her very closely. She's going to the Black Sea. So but how can we do it? Because we share information on maritime traffic at trans-regional level. And let me just highlight an initiative that is sponsored by 42 navies today. It was initiated by the Italian Navy back in 2006, which is the Virtual Regional Maritime Traffic Center, the VRMTC. That is a system whereby we exchange information on marine traffics among all these navies. The great thing, though, is that we not just exchange the position of ships and what they are doing, where they go, where they come from, and where they go, and what they are loaded with, but we also have a chat line with those navies. And this chat line that goes through the internet over, well, it's a protected protocol, but I mean, it's still commercial, allows us, in some cases, when it comes to maritime safety, migrants at sea, to exchange information that can also save lives. And this is something great that we have extended to other regions through the Trans-Regional Maritime Network that connects the wider community of the wider Mediterranean to other regions of the world, South America and Southeast Asia. And last thing I would like to add has been said by Professor Olsen, if I'm not wrong. In geopolitical terms, the focus of the strategy of the Italian military is the region that was mentioned by General Graziano, the enlarged or wider Mediterranean. This wider Mediterranean is a geopolitical concept, evolved into a geostrategic concept, has no specific geographic coordinates because we are extended it based on our national interest. And I may well say that today, the wider Mediterranean, of course, is focused on the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, but I mean, it goes well to the west into the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Guinea, where we have the threat from still piracy, despite it slightly coming down, which is an achievement for us, because piracy has been reducing in the Gulf of Guinea, and it goes even further to the north. I take this chance to say that the Italian Navy, since 2017, has a ship in the Arctic for 4 months every year. ITS Alliance. She's back now from her second deployment of the year. And to the east, we are in the Red Sea, where there are lots of threats to maritime traffic. And the Gulf of Aden through Operation Atalanta, mentioned by the general, I believe, because it still tracks back to the European Union maritime activities, Operation Atalanta. And we have a ship at the moment in the Persian Gulf, which you mentioned as the Emaso. I mean, the tactical commander of Emaso now is an Italian admiral. And we have a ship there, our newest ship, the multi-purpose patrol vessel Town de Revel, that is also providing security to the Soccer World Championship. So we are not with the team, but at least with the ship and the group of military within a joint military operation run by the Italian.
It's fascinating to see how navies are cooperating, way beyond the kind of NATO-European framework. How that's
indeed
changing. And Michael, on this topic, I mean, there's some, very well established networks of cooperation, channels of cooperation. Can you talk a little bit about what Middle Eastern countries are doing on this front? How much coordination are we seeing?
Yeah. So what I'd like to start by answering that question with leaving you with a message. It picks up on what the Admiral said. Infrastructure reflects strategic intent. We had a lot of talks here about green energy coming across the Mediterranean. There is going to be no electricity sent from renewable energy from Africa to Europe without ships to protect those undersea cables. There's going to be no green hydrogen sent as green ammonia in ships across the Mediterranean without that. So the investment in naval infrastructure is important, but a key investment are ports. Now, this is something that hasn't been mentioned. China has invested $18 billion in Mediterranean ports since the first investment in Piraeus in 2009. China has 12 ports in the Mediterranean. I wrote an article for Middle East Institute, The Race to Reset the Middle East Maritime Map. I just recommend you to that article and the map. But you take a tour. You start in Tripoli. China runs the port in Tripoli in Lebanon. It built it, it expanded it, and that connects to, actually, by rail all the way to Iran. But at the same time, the Chinese built a port in Haifa, Israel, that then connects the other way. All the majority of the ports that are being expanded in Egypt, on the coast of Egypt, are in China, Chinese. Alexandria, Abu Qir, all the way across. And then the new deep sea port that's being built in Algeria, in Shershel, Chinese, which will they're trying to counter, Tanger Med, or Tanger, which became the largest port on the Mediterranean. And I mentioned we should talk about that. It surpassed Algeciras and Valencia. I teach in Spain. I try to tell my Spanish colleagues, look at what's going on. And it's part of the Moroccan economic miracle. Ports matter. Why? Because the industries are happening at ports. You mentioned special economic zones. Tanger Med, or if you go to Egypt, the Port Said, even Poland is investing in industries in Port Said, Egypt. They have their own special industrial zone. Well, if all the manufacturing is happening at ports, you need to protect those ports. And also, if the Chinese are building them, they can be used as dual-use ports. And then, of course, you can listen to what navies, the U.S. is worried that they're going to pull into Haifa, but the Chinese are there and they can see everything and hear everything the U.S. is doing. So ports are highly strategic. Now they're being run with AI, right? If we don't invest in ports, if we don't combine the naval picture with the maritime picture, yes, the commerce will go across, but who is going to be in charge of it? And who will be able to pull the plug when they don't like what's going on? So you can't take for granted that Europe is going to lead maritime commerce across the Mediterranean. You'll buy the products, but it doesn't mean that Europe will be in charge. This goes all the way back to Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great naval strategist, about how the free flow of commerce is connected to naval might. Now, the Chinese read A.T. Mahan not that way, not in the way that gave us the post-World War II global commons, but as a means for global domination. So I think there needs to, if we don't invest, we can't have the Chinese cooperate from a Western position of strength in our own neighborhood. So infrastructure is very important, and that brings in how to cooperate with Middle East countries. Egypt was so worried themselves about Chinese domination that they asked CMA CGM to help expand a container port because they didn't want over-reliance. And this is where Maersk comes in. This is where the Danish Trade Council comes in. So, and look, the Tanger Med, right, France helped, but where were the European countries? No, the only place that they got money from China. And then they built the high-speed rail. France helped. And then where were the European partners? Nowhere. It was Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE that helped build the high-speed rail that connects there. Who's building the high-speed rail in Suez and all from Alexandria to the new is China. So where is Siemens? Where is Alstom? Where are the Italian companies? So this is where we have to bring business. We have to bring environmentalists. We have to bring military people in the same room to think with strategic intent. These aren't contradictory. You want green future, you need to engage the military. You need to engage business. And therefore, you need to then, as I agree with the Admiral, sub-regional. Develop the Eastern Med. Develop the Western Med. Now, Italy is in a great position because it faces both and is really involved in both. And Italy should have a role. And I'll end on this. And it's very important for Italy because Italy had this concept of Il Mediterraneo allagato, right? So for 20 years, it kept its commitments to transatlantic. It kept its commitment to Europe. But it became the second largest exporter in Europe, the second largest manufacturer. Its sold production exceeds France by 1/3 by focusing on Mediterranean markets. So Italy succeeded. Italy needs to exert leadership, in my opinion. That's why I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be with my esteemed colleagues. And Italy, I think, is in a position to make sure also the Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Mediterranean also integrate more.
Thank you. We've seen such dramatic change happening in this maritime space, but also in the Middle East since the Abraham Accords. Israel obviously has ties now with the UAE, and it's cultivating closer ties with other Gulf countries. We've also seen joint naval exercises with US, Israel, and other countries, including Saudi Arabia. Can you talk a little bit about how the maritime space can be a driver to help accelerate this process?
Yeah, and it goes beyond the maritime, because security cooperation per se is such a central component in the history of Israel-Arab, Israel-Muslim relations. If you look at the relationship that Israel has with countries, it began through security. Countries that we didn't have any diplomatic ties with, security cooperation was happening behind the scenes. Look Morocco, look Gulf states. Countries that we signed agreements and there were recognition and diplomatic ties, like Egypt, like Turkey, still most of the cooperation in the early years was around security and behind the scenes. And even with the Palestinians, the one thing, or only one thing that remained from all those good years of a peace process is security cooperation, coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So security is central. And what is happening after Abraham Accords is that Israel has new horizons for security cooperation, also in the naval exercises, also between air forces, also within NATO. It's not regional cooperation per se, but it's international cooperation together with regional partners. So there's still a difference. There are still obstacles for just regional security cooperation that ties to the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli conflict, of course. But it opens up new opportunities. Some of the speakers talked about connectivity between East and West Med. This is something that is opening up for Israel. Also, the Red Sea, some lessons from security cooperation, also in the naval maritime sphere from the Mediterranean Sea, may be replicated in the Red Sea domain. Now, having said all of that, for regional security, we must not rely only on security. And part of the thing that Israel's foreign policy, I think, should promote is to move from a security-based cooperation to a civilian-based. So it's not about neglecting security, it's about building some floors above the security, about civilian cooperation, economic cooperation, political cooperation, and many of those countries that I mentioned, including, by the way, Cyprus and Greece, with which there's no diplomatic problems, but the ability to go beyond the security cooperation was the thing that makes relationships sustainable, because relationships that are built only on security interest may not last when regional calculations change. And when Israel and the UAE signed the Abraham Accords, initially in Israel the framing was about Iran, and its security cooperation about Iran. But when policies regarding Iran or practices about interaction change, you must have all the other components of the relationship to have them stick, and that's very true at a time when there is possible escalation on the horizon in the Israeli-Palestinian relationship and others. We need all these safeguarding which are tied to security but not only related to security.
Thank you. And Taha, can you talk a little bit about what Turkey can do and has been doing to help stabilize the Mediterranean with its NATO partners and also on its own, maybe with particular attention to the East Mediterranean, which has not always been completely peaceful?
Yeah, the Turkish case, actually, there's a cluster of issues which has shaped Turkish position or difficulty to position itself in this issue. energy, Cyprus issues with Greece, regional power competition, internationalization of Libyan crisis, irregular migration, EU-Turkish relations, Turkish-Washington relations, Russian invasion, list goes on. So the biggest problem when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean and somehow also in Aegean issue, when you consider all those issues at the same time and try to solve it, I mean, this is neither manageable, not tangible, at least at once. You cannot solve these issues. And this should not be on the table. Meaning, not only Turkey, but the actors who are dealing with Turkey should be following, if not purifying the list, they should be simplifying this list. And when I check out, I just put the names of the issues, some of them in this cluster, how can we simplify it? I think the energy issue is the best one to pick it up. Why? Because if you reduce entire thing into energy issue, doesn't mean, I mean, no one is going to forget about Cyprus issue, the Aegean conflicting approaches will not disappear, the maximalist approaches will stay there, etc. But if you could reduce entire issue into energy issue and then reduce it into energy competition, I'm quite sure there will be a positive ground to find a cooperation. And out of that cooperation, you could even reach to interdependency on energy. And interdependency is a very good thing, because when you have interdependency, you will be buying free insurance policy to reach out stable and sustainable security. So this should be the roadmap. But to do that, there is a huge geopolitical blindness still taking place. That goes to Europe. And there is one single huge question hasn't been answered for decades. And interestingly, both EU and at a certain extent NATO acted as if it is not there. And it is the question, the following. Could EU or Europe at all be a secure place without having southeastern flank or southeastern region of EU secured? This is a vital question. It was always there, but we weren't able to get, at least last 20, 25 years, a serious approach to the southeastern flank or southeastern region of Europe. What doesn't mean? It means there is a country called in southeastern Turkey, southeastern Europe, and it's a big one. Actually, the huge one when you compare to Europe. And it is Turkey. So in order to Europe to reach some kind of stable southeastern flank and the region, there should be a very stable partnership with Turkey. And I think there are more opportunities to reach out that partnership than having last 20 years conflicting items. How are they going to simplify their approach on that? Not easy. Both, you should add this conflicting process, the agency issues, all of them are manageable, but as if Ukraine is not under Russian invasion attempt, that agency issue popped up again, and it is not helping. So, as a conclusion, as long as we reach a kind of geopolitical enlargement from Europe, meaning that, European enlargement process is failing lately. They are not enlarging, rather they are actually losing members like UK. But they need, at this time specifically, a geopolitical enlargement to provide security, both Europe, Turkey, and the Eastern Mediterranean. I think time is almost up. Let me stop.
We have a few more minutes if any of our guests would like to add anything. I've seen Admiral De Carolis scribbling furiously.
Well, no, thank you. Based on what has just been said and what was brought about by Professor Nimrod Goran, security, you talked about security cooperation. It happens that security cooperation in the taxonomy, the NATO taxonomy of maritime operations, is one of the three main pillars. One pillar being combat and warfare operations, where you have sea control, power projection. Then you have maritime security operations, and then you have security cooperation. And there is a lot in that. And one of the reasons that I would like to bring up why it is relevant is also because it helps in generating, you talked about interdependencies, it helps to operate with a comprehensive approach that is not just viewed at military level, not just navies, not just the military, but interinstitutional, interagency, and of course cooperation, in order to develop all the possible different dimensions of cooperation. That's one of the keys to success. And within security cooperation, I may say, as the Navy, we have a historic role. Here we have a representative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we talk and we work on that. Naval diplomacy, so the capability of navies to support the build-up of relationships among countries, and the ease with which maritime forces can cooperate and sustain what has been mentioned as security cooperation.
Well, thank you. Anything?
Just to say that we are facing a time of big challenging, maybe cooperation, but for sure big challenging. That is the moment the European country, and not only the European country, are going to invest more in security and defense. Now, of course, I represent a company that is an excellence in shipbuilding or maritime assets, but it's time in which we have to extend in European Union the cooperation, because one problem we have for sure is the fragmentation of our industry. So to build an industrial base that is going to support the security, defense, and development of the forces that are going to face a long time of crisis. In this moment, we are again speaking about Russia, but the long-term crisis is the fight for technological sovereignty and technological superiority. That is something that look at the East, they look at the Pacific, and the European Union is not to become a base, a fragile base between iron base that are United States and China. So we have to project our effort to build this strategic autonomy as a base for the future, not to remain again with problem for raw material or to stop by the Suez Canal, and to have the ability to pursue this new efficiency, because Europe put already a lot of money, not enough. We hope more for defense and security, but we should spend better. And in this, to have to cooperate better. For example, in Europe, we are trying to build a European corvette. That is also a symbolic effort, because we have to reduce the number of ships, the number of systems. If we are able to converge to only one system, we are going to save money, to project in the future, and maybe to build something modular that is going to receive the future transformation, and also to work easier with the southern country. And of course, to increase the cooperation, we always hope, between NATO and European Union.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our guests for such a fascinating discussion. You gave us plenty to think about.